have this Shikishi board, which is rice paper affixed to a board. It's used for calligraphy and Japanese or Chinese sumi painting. And rice paper, I've painted on before, and I know it's super absorbent, but I found as I started to draw on this that it was much more absorbent than I remembered. As you'll see when I do this, I can get sort of a fine line if I'm super light touch with my brush, but it's not as fine as I would like. And so after seeing how this behaves, I decided to move to plan B, which I don't really have. But it's something that evolves as I draw and paint, especially when I'm working with new materials. And this is what I'm always talking about in my videos, is adapting, is observing what your materials and tools are doing and behaving, and then not getting worked up about it not conforming to your own ideas. Because as I said, this Shikishi board is not really allowing me to get the fine lines that I want. So rather than get worked up about that, I'm going to just go a complete opposite direction with that, and I'm just going to take water to it, because that'll make it even more blendy and bleedy. And then just see what happens as I do this. As you can see, the water makes the ink do some really cool things. And now, instead of just this blue-black color that I started off with, I'm getting this glorious separation of various tones of blue. I'm getting this sort of cyan, cerulean colored blue separating out from this darker ultramarine navy tones. And I really love that. So, this is what I do when my materials refuse to behave like I tell them to. I just start playing around and seeing what happens. And it can be really liberating and fun, so I highly suggest it. It's a lot more fun than getting frustrated with it. There's an initial layer there. I'm going to set this aside and let it dry and then see what happens next. I think I'm going to add some towers. In the shade of this giant tree. And walls built into this hillside here. Which give a sense of scale to this tree, which now feels more like a world tree type of thing. can see the range of lines and strokes that I'm able to achieve with a brush pen versus a regular pen, or even just painting. You can't really do this kind of line work with paint because you have to keep dipping your brush then into recharge your pigment. But with a brush pen, you have this continuous flow just kind of feeding down into your tip, which then allows you to do either sort of painterly approach or a more drawing approach. I like that versatility. I like being able to switch back and forth with a single medium like that. See, right now I'm using it much more in a drawing mode, but every once in a while I'm shifting and doing much more painterly types of strokes as well. For example, with these leaves. Now, all of this was unplanned from the beginning. You saw how I started with just blurred lines and wet color. So I'm just looking at the shapes and forms, and I'm pulling out branches as they appear to me in the darker and lighter areas of this wet large structure that I started off with. I'm painting with this side of my brush so that it skips a little bit over the surface, the rough surface of this rice paper, and that gives me this rough texture as well. It's dry brush. It's dry brush pen style. Few more towers on this side as well. Now I am switching over to a white brush pen. Further shaping the branches up above in this tree. Pulling out forms where I see them. Negative space for the branches as well as the leaves and foliage. making sure to leave a lot of the really good stuff that happened in the wet and wet phase and not overwork that. Things like this glorious cerulean blue that happens in the separation of the blues. It appears in a number of places here, and I want to maintain as much of that as possible, not overwork those areas. Next, I am taking my gray in here and softening things up a little bit, blending with it so that it's not just the stark white and then the blue of these lines, but blending things in a little bit more. It also lets the blues bleed out again in more interesting ways. I think I like these darker rooftops like that. There we go. And a few little bits of brown for dark contrast. Just to pull everything together. We got lights, we got midtones, and then this kind of gives darks. Also, contrasting color really helps to pull out the shadows, to make them more rich, because otherwise if you just maintain the blue and the gray, it has a monochrome look to it. But the addition of the brown with its very reddish tints gives it just that little bit of extra that pushes it over into a more colored scheme.